communities in Mendocino County that are underserved. Every one of the communities in the 5th District, with the exception of the outskirts, the suburban part of Ukiah, are underserved at one level or another. And I think this actually is a question of the equity of services and the need for services. And I should add that there's Wawala is pretty well served by a private provider there, as I understand it. But this is a major issue, particularly in the 5th District. And I want to get into further in your presentation here
Sure.
As to the extent to which the communities are aware of your efforts here, because I think there's a need here for greater community action, but I'll come back to that later. Thank you.
And just to make a note on the map that's on the screen, you can see the red, yellow, and green dots, and that also indicates the availability of backhaul. So that's another kind of point of reference there for you. If we look at the other side of the equation, which I think probably starts to develop what Supervisor Kovacs was talking about, we looked at what the apparent demand was in the different regions. And we did this by town for the whole coastal region. We looked at a variety of different criteria that we know to be successful criteria to actually get things done in a broadband world. So we looked at local leadership, which is very important, the sort of the grassroots, but also the political will of folks like you guys to help move things forward. We looked at local interest, in particular with this project. We look at the participation in the process and what the input was. And we also looked at some regional growth, which we have not rolled into the specific study yet. We're still collecting the regional growth data. We decided to add that because the telephone or the communications providers, the larger ones, were very anxious to see the growth data. And they feel that that is actually one of the key criteria for them to be able to make a decision about investing in a region. So in your area, I want to say just one thing. You should be really proud of the people that live here. They did a bang-up job in terms of responding to the survey. In fact, more than half of the surveys for the whole project came from Mendocino County. More than half. So that means you have a lot of interest in this neighborhood for these things. And you have high scoring areas and medium scoring areas. And the medium scoring areas were so high, they just missed the cutoff, or cutoff that we made for the high scoring areas. So basically everybody but Branscombe, Calpella, Covelo, and Dos Rios actually had a very active participation in this process and scored very highly. I understand that some of these areas, one of the things we're going to try to do now is go back out and get more community input. So in case you're in the low scoring area, you have a chance to redeem yourself at this point. But really it has been you have a tremendous group of folks here who really, really want broadband. So if you look at the chart of supply against demand, so across the bottom we're looking at supply. And across on the y-axis, we're looking at the apparent demand. And you can see that a lot of your communities fall in the none or underserved supply side of the equation. And a lot of those same communities have very high or medium high apparent demand. So if you want to look at places where action is probably likely to happen, it would be in that quadrant there, the left top quadrant, where you can see that you have a lot of people who are really anxious to get something done and not so much supply. On the left side, on the right side of the chart, it's always was amazing to us when we were doing the analysis how many of the communities where there was already a fairly decent supply of broadband. For example, in Fort Bragg, in Willits and Ukiah, there's 4 different providers that provide broadband services in those areas. which is pretty remarkable for a rural area, but goes to show that the sort of city centers are easier and cheaper to wire and all that sort of thing. But the fact is that demand is still there, that there was still a fairly significant participation and still good local leadership in place to keep that, that on the radar. So one of the things that we're doing is to come up with some obvious infrastructure scenarios and some that we're still trying to figure out what to do about as part of this project. Obviously, one of the really obvious ones is Comcast build out on the coast. The Comcast has already tentatively agreed to seriously look at building out some of the adjacency places on the coast. There is a program that the CPUC is running today called CASF, and Lord knows what that stands for. But it will provide 40% of the build cost of actually increasing broadband supply in rural areas. And Comcast is one of the only providers that actually, as out of two in your neighborhoods here, that actually meet the CPUC criteria of 1 and 3 megabits. So that's very good. And they are actually starting to work actively with the community in that area to see if they can actually mount this effort and increase the service there. And that, I think, is a direct relationship to this project. They went to the meetings there